This is Resident Evil 6, regarded by many as a critical failure despite being a massive commercial success and one of the best-selling games in the franchise. Resident Evil 6 is what happens when a franchise reaches terminal velocity. It's the video game equivalent to the Fast and the Furious franchise, starting off modest enough, then slowly upping the ante with each installment, eventually evolving into something that is almost completely unrecognizable from the original product. The first Resident Evil was released in 1996 to absolute commercial and critical acclaim. It was a slow-paced, tense survival horror game featuring vulnerable main characters and a focus on exploration and puzzles, and the players loved it. Unsurprisingly, its success led to the development of a sequel, and Resident Evil 2 was released 2 years later in 1998. Slightly less puzzles, a little more action. Another smashing success. Then, the following year, out comes Resident Evil 3 in 1999. And would you look at that? More enemies, more weapons, more action? Another excellent title for Capcom. Then, there was quiet. The years went on without a true sequel. That was until Resident Evil 4 comes out in 2005 and dominates the charts. It revolutionizes not just the survival horror genre, but the shooter genre too. The third-person, over-the-shoulder gameplay caused a tsunami that influenced everything from Gears of War to The Last of Us. In Resident Evil 4, survival horror takes a back seat. The ammo is plentiful, the enemies more numerous. Yes, of course, it still has horror elements, maybe even enough to still be labeled as a survival horror, but be honest, is there a single enemy in the game that you didn't kill? I don't remember one. I killed every man, beast and barrel that stood in my way. Aside from some returning characters, the few puzzles that are in the game are the last remaining mainstays of the series. God, I wish that was me! The series is now at, quite possibly, the peak of its critical and commercial success. Complete global saturation is a line from 2009's Resident Evil 5. Twice the players, twice the enemies, twice the resources. Puzzles? Yeah, sure. But check out this haymaker, baby! Wow, are those lickers? Those things were crazy in the second game. Damn, this is the best action franchise I've ever played. How are they gonna top this? The year is 2012. The end of the world was upon us, and who came to us in our hour of need? That's right! Everybody's favorite action franchise. Resident Evil 6 had 4 different campaigns with 8 playable characters. Series favorites like Chris Redfield, Leon Kennedy, Ellis from Left 4 Dead. You could be John Wick, before John Wick was even released. Now you can dodge, duck, dip, dive and dodge like never before. See this horrifying monster? Put it in the ground. The sales grew and grew and grew until quiet. Then, something happened at Capcom. For years, fans of the original trilogy had decried the series' shift into an action title, and longed for a return to the old style of Resident Evil. And despite the fact that the sales were still excellent, Capcom decided to do something very uncharacteristic. They decided to give the fans what they wanted. When Resident Evil 7 came out in 2017, 5 years after Resident Evil 6's bombastic action-packed installment, it was a slow-paced, tense survival horror game featuring a vulnerable main character and a focus on exploration and puzzles. The fans loved it, and it was another commercial success. Capcom found new confidence in its decision to return to the series' roots. However, there seemed to be some part of Capcom that didn't quite want to commit entirely to that idea. What better way to go back to the series' roots than to literally go back and make the same games again? The Resident Evil 2 remake released in 2019. Despite returning to the same third-person perspective as Resident Evil 4, it retained the atmosphere and vulnerability of the original. Slightly less puzzles, a little more action. This is Resident Evil 2 brought to the modern age after all. You need to be a little more capable of dispatching enemies than before. Another smashing success. Then, the following year, out comes Resident Evil 3 Remake in 2020. And would you look at that? More enemies, more weapons, more action? The public loved it. Another excellent title for Capcom. Then, 1 year later, Resident Evil Village, comes out and dominates the charts. In Resident Evil Village, survival horror takes a back seat. The ammo is plentiful, the enemies more numerous. Yes, of course it still has horror elements, maybe even enough to still be labelled as a survival horror, but be honest, is there a single enemy in the game that you didn't kill? I don't remember one. I killed every beast, man and barrel that stood in my way. Aside from some returning characters, the few puzzles that the game has are the last remaining mainstays of the series. God, I wish that was me! The series is now at, quite possibly, the peak of its critical and commercial success.